For weeks, the questions kept building. Why was Cassius acting strange? What was he hiding? And why did everything seem to circle back to Josslyn? Now, on May 7th, the rinse recap of General Hospital, the silence finally breaks because Cassius stops running, stops hiding, and starts talking. But once the truth comes out, Josslyn may realize the danger was far bigger than she ever imagined. Catch the rinse. May 7th. Cassius spills, all to Josslyn, answering burning questions. In Port Charles, secrets rarely disappear quietly. They build pressure over time, growing heavier with every avoided conversation, every suspicious glance, and every incomplete explanation. Eventually, silence becomes impossible to maintain. That appears to be exactly what happens between Cassius and Josslyn on May 7th. After weeks of mounting tension, emotional ambiguity, and increasingly suspicious behavior, Cassius finally reaches a breaking point. The guarded walls begin to crack. Questions that have hovered over the storyline for weeks finally receive answers. But what makes this moment compelling is not simply the information itself. It is the emotional weight behind why Cassius chooses to reveal it now. Because confessions in General Hospital are never just about truth. They are about pressure, fear, trust, and consequences. Cassius, a character defined by concealment. Cassius has recently become one of the most emotionally guarded figures in Port Charles. His behavior has consistently suggested internal conflict. He appears distracted, defensive, emotionally strained, constantly carrying unspoken pressure. These qualities transformed him into a mystery long before any actual confession occurred, because audiences instinctively recognize concealment. And Cassius has been carrying the emotional energy of someone hiding something significant. Why the confession matters now. Timing is everything in soap storytelling. Cassius could have spoken earlier. He didn't. That delay matters. The fact that he speaks now suggests emotional pressure has finally outweighed emotional control. Something shifted. Perhaps? Fear became unbearable. Guilt intensified. Trust in Josslyn deepened. Or external pressure made silence impossible. Whatever the trigger, the confession represents emotional surrender as much as narrative revelation. Josslyn, the emotional center of the storyline. Josslyn Jax functions as the emotional anchor in this dynamic. What makes Joss compelling is her balance between emotional openness and emotional resilience. She seeks truth directly, but she also feels emotional consequences deeply. That combination makes her the perfect recipient for Cassius's confession, because the moment is not simply informational. It is deeply personal. The atmosphere leading into the reveal. The storyline leading up to this moment has been built carefully around uncertainty. Viewers have watched. Cassius behaving suspiciously. Emotional tension increasing. Conversations remaining incomplete. Josslyn growing increasingly aware that something is wrong. This slow accumulation of unease created narrative pressure. By May 7th, the confession feels inevitable, and inevitability often creates stronger emotional payoff than sudden shock. Why spilling everything changes the dynamic? The phrase spills all implies total emotional release, not partial honesty, not strategic explanation, complete exposure. Complete. That changes the emotional landscape dramatically, because once full truth enters the room, relationships shift, perceptions change, emotional safety disappears. Truth destabilizes everything, especially when secrets have existed for a long time. The emotional cost of hiding the truth. One of the strongest elements of this storyline is the emotional burden Cassius has clearly been carrying. Keeping secrets creates psychological strain. The longer concealment continues, the more emotionally exhausting it becomes. That exhaustion often manifests through irritability, emotional withdrawal, unpredictable behavior, desperation. Cassius has displayed many of these traits already, which makes the confession feel psychologically believable. The difference between answers and resolution. Importantly, answers do not automatically create peace. In fact, answers often create larger emotional problems. Josslyn may finally understand what Cassius has been hiding, but understanding does not eliminate consequence. Instead, the confession may introduce new fears, emotional betrayal, dangerous implications, shifting trust dynamics. The truth resolves mystery while simultaneously creating instability. Why Josslyn's reaction matters as much as the truth. The emotional power of the scene depends not only on what Cassius says, but on how Joss processes it, because truth impacts people differently depending on emotional context. Joss may feel shock, compassion, anger, fear, sympathy, possibly all at once. That emotional complexity gives the storyline depth beyond simple revelation. The role of trust in the confession. Confessions require vulnerability. By telling Joss the truth, Cassius is taking emotional risk. He is trusting her with information powerful enough to change how she sees him. That vulnerability matters because emotionally guarded characters rarely surrender control willingly. If Cassius is finally opening up, it suggests desperation mixed with emotional trust. And that combination is dangerous. The possibility that Joss was always the key. An interesting layer beneath the storyline is the idea that Joss may have always been central to Cassius's emotional conflict. Perhaps he delayed the truth specifically because he feared losing her trust, putting her in danger, changing their relationship permanently. If so, the confession becomes even more emotionally charged because silence was not just concealment, it was emotional protection, however flawed. The shift from mystery to fallout. Before May 7th, the storyline revolved around questions. After the confession, it shifts toward consequences. That transition is critical. Mystery creates suspense. Fallout creates drama. And fallout tends to spread rapidly through Port Charles once hidden truths surface. The psychological tension beneath the scene. Confession scenes work best when emotional tension exists beneath the dialogue. This storyline succeeds because the tension has been building for weeks. Every suspicious glance, every avoided answer, every moment of hesitation added psychological pressure. So when Cassius finally speaks openly, the emotional release feels earned. Why? This storyline works so well. The narrative succeeds because it prioritizes emotional realism over simple shock value. Cassius does not suddenly confess randomly. The storyline carefully establishes emotional pressure, behavioral inconsistency, rising suspicion, increasing emotional closeness with Joss. Those elements create natural progression toward revelation, and natural progression strengthens audience investment. The danger hidden inside the truth. Another compelling element is the possibility that the truth itself may create danger. Secrets often exist for reasons. If Cassius concealed information intentionally, exposure may now trigger consequences from other characters, hidden enemies, existing conflicts, emotional retaliation. Truth may solve one problem while creating several more. The emotional vulnerability of Josslyn. Joss now faces emotional vulnerability herself. Once someone learns painful truth, they must decide whether to trust again, whether to forgive, whether to protect themselves emotionally. Those decisions are rarely easy, especially when emotional attachment already exists. Cassius, internal transformation. The confession may also signal personal transformation for Cassius. Before this moment, he existed primarily in survival mode. Hiding, deflecting, managing perception. Now he moves into emotional exposure, and emotional exposure changes characters permanently because they can no longer control how others see them. The ripple effect across Port Charles. No major confession remains isolated in General Hospital. Once the truth exists openly between Cassius and Joss, the effects may spread outward quickly. Other characters could become involved. New alliances may form, existing tensions may intensify. Because truth in Port Charles never stays emotionally contained. Themes driving the storyline. Several powerful themes shape this arc. Truth versus protection. Cassius may have hidden the truth to protect others, but secrecy created damage anyway. Trust versus fear. Confession requires emotional trust, overcoming fear of consequence. Revelation versus fallout. Answers solve mystery but create emotional instability. Why audiences connect to stories like this. Viewers respond strongly to confession-driven storylines because they reflect universal emotional experiences. Fear of vulnerability, anxiety over telling the truth, worry about losing trust, the emotional relief and danger of honesty. Those themes feel deeply human, even within dramatic soap storytelling. The emotional energy after the confession. What happens after confession often matters more than the confession itself. Once emotional truth becomes visible, characters cannot return to emotional ignorance. Joss now knows, Cassius knows, she knows, and that mutual awareness changes everything between them. The possibility of redemption. Confession also opens the possibility of redemption. If Cassius truly regrets hiding the truth, honesty may represent the first step toward emotional repair. But redemption in Port Charles is never guaranteed, because forgiveness depends on the severity of the truth, emotional damage caused, and whether trust can realistically be rebuilt.